Lisa.
Hey, happy Monday. I think we are able to lock and load on all the panelists. BK is on, Margot's on. Gary joined the party. Well, you look awesome, Gary. You look ready to be rebellious for
I
today.
went I am in my office and I made sure to get the quote wall behind me, the famous quote wall that was an entrepreneur.
And
Like
I
that's
love
the
your quote wall. I need, Margot
that's
will
it.
need one of those.
Give it a t-shirt memorial with we're building all
A
of our
t-shirt. I love it.
Awesome, awesome. Well, I think that everyone is just joining in. So I'm going to start at least welcoming everybody and doing some quick intros while everyone joins and we get some attendees on the line. If you are joining us, you are joining the amazing panelist lineup for how AI is going to revolutionize distribution. And I love it. Given my journey throughout insurance, I always wanted to keep going closer and closer and closer to the value chain upstream, closer to where it all happens. And I've learned so much in that journey, starting all the way at the back end and moving forward. So this is going to be amazing. We hear so much in today's day and age about AI, about generative AI, about deploying AI. And we often hear about it in maybe downstream value chain discussions. So today we're going to be bringing you a sponsored webinar on AI and distribution. And the main host of this is IRYS Insurtech. And I'm going to let Margot kick it off with her introduction, Margeaux Giles. And then we're going to kick it over to our other panelists. But Margot, as everyone's joining, do you mind? I mean, for those who don't know you, they need to follow you. How can you not know Margot? But do you
I
mind
mean,
introducing yourself? There might be a few select people who haven't met you yet.
yeah, I mean, if you're on LinkedIn, I'm constantly annoying everyone on LinkedIn. So Margeaux Giles, I'm the founder and CEO of IRYS Insurtech. I have been in insurance for 17 years. I started in distribution. So I started on the retail agency side and focused a lot on P&C in the Southeast and mid to large market commercial. So I like to joke 17 years ago, it's pretty much the same as it is now in large commercial risk and P&C. We had a lot of, we had the triple carbon copy paper. I think, I was 20 something years old when I started. I'm 17 years ago. I'm trying not to date myself, but we had a typewriter in the office. We had some floppy disks that we were quoting on. And so certainly that was something that I did not experience outside of my work life, right? Those are antiques, if you will. And so I spent my life as operations chief operating officer of agency, and then went through M&A myself, and then eventually moved into private equity. But my whole life's mission was to scale and grow, and I loved insurance. And so when you get into ops, software is where it's at. And so and did that journey. But thank you for having me, Lisa. And I cannot wait to start talking about data.
I
And
mean,
most importantly, data and AI.
I am so excited to have you here and to be assembling this panel. It's actually one of my greatest joys in life. I could not be more passionate about it. So Bhaskar, I call you BK. So Bhaskar Kalita joining us from Quantify. I'm going to let you introduce yourself quickly and your role. You and I met back in another lifetime when I was doing another role. So very excited to have you here today joining us on this webinar.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm excited to be here with Margot and Gary talking about AI powered, workflows for distribution. A little bit of background about myself. Year 21 in the industry, started as a technologist. My background is data. That's where I started. From an industry perspective, I've spent all my life in financial services, and more specifically so in insurance, around 16 years in insurance. Done core system transformation for a while before joining Quantify to run the insurance and financial services business. We focus on AI first digital engineering, which is looking at every problem statements through the lens of AI and solving what matters. I'll talk more about what we do as we go through this webinar, but excited to be here. I think you picked up a topic, an area that is underserved, so to speak, from a technology perspective. If you look at insurance overall, distribution is one area that is always thought to be, okay, it's going to get taken care of. That's how people generally approach it, but
It's
this is
not.
something that
I know it's not.
focusing on. So excited to be here. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us, BK. And last but certainly not least, Gary Hoberman, CEO of Uncork. Gary is one of my, I don't know, set my North Star, watch what he's doing. As soon as he started defining codeless, I'm like, wait, what's that? And now, of course, he's coming out with it. We'll talk today about the AI Fulfillment Center concept. Gary, welcome to the webinar. Would you mind introducing yourself to those people?
Of course. And Lisa, I have an AI chatbot that looks for your emails, and whenever you say, "Can you please join me?" and answers yes, it just responds and says like, and it adds it to my calendar. Already. Like that's it. So that's it. So Gary, CEO founder for Uncork. I love being here with both Margeaux and BK, who we've known and gotten to know, amazing work that both do and partners. And so it's funny, data. 31 years ago, I'm going to date myself similar, but I tried to take all the off-track bet racing out of the newspapers to pump into a neural net I built to try to predict who would win the next race. Didn't work. And again, the compute power was floppy disks still at that point. So you can imagine why. But entered Wall Street 30 years ago to climb that corporate ladder, building trading systems and wealth management and transaction services and payment engines and e-commerce and spent 25 years doing that. And then the last 5 of that was global CIO at MetLife. I love data. Like to me, I'm an engineer by heart. I love to build apps, but I went and got certified as a database administrator back in the day just to understand indexing and understand what's happening when I actually use data behind the scenes and the internals of that. So data. And when I entered insurance in 2012, capital markets banking, it is an entire industry built on data. Like the entire, you could just call every app, like every company, a data-driven company. But it's not, as Margeaux said, like when you think about what actually is there, it hasn't changed much, and just thrilled to be working with those changing it. Thanks.
Awesome. Well, we have a treat in store for everyone joining today. We're going to go ahead and get into the content. And again, as you join, I just want to remind everyone there is a Q&A function in Zoom. Please ask your questions as they occur to you. I will be moderating. I'm your host, Lisa Wardlaw. And I will be moderating them as they either come up pertinent to the discussion, or we'll have a Q&A section towards the end. So please don't be shy. We will try to take all your questions. And if there's some that we don't get to in the context of the webinar, we will certainly be serving them up on social media. So again, today we're going to explore, as you can see by the consistency and the dexterity and diversity of these panelists, you cannot solve for AI and distribution with just one point solution. It requires that you transcend your foundational technology by more than just one widget or one little thing, which often I've found when I look at a lot of the tech and distribution, because of some of the legacy traditional systems. I mean, we talked about floppy disk, like in the intro to this, we typically had this fragmented or point solution approach. So today we're going to bring to you a cross-sect through this webinar. We're going to talk about mastering your data. Every single panelist already mentioned they led with data, so we're going to get into that in a minute. Then we're going to talk about AI-powered embedded workflows, otherwise known as business process management systems, and how we can now embed AI in that. Intelligent document ingestion using LLMs. This is going to be like, love this. And an AI-powered fulfillment center. What does all that mean to you? So what it means to you listening is, how do we build a platform designed for the future? How do you build foundational capabilities that's not just solving one problem, but solving multiple problems in an anticipatory or dynamic way, so that as problems unfold, you're able to not react, but proactively be able to handle this, and more importantly, manage your business. All right, so let's get down into it. The first section we're going to talk about is data, data, data. It's all about the data. Every time I get into an AI podcast, we want to go straight to the technology, and everybody on this thing knows I love to get into, are we going neural? Are we have RAG? What are we doing? LLM, traditional AI? Nope. Nothing matters without the data. So I'm going to quote one of the people that I actually spent a lot of work implementing Oracle, yes, in an SAP shop, even more fun. But when I did that, Larry Ellison, of course, rises to, whether you love Larry, you have to appreciate him no matter what you think about him and some of his thoughts. And his most recent quote is, AI is utterly useless without having your data in order. So I'm going to kick off this segment on mastering your data with that quote, because audacious, but true. The two things he mentions in this video that I saw is, listen, if you actually even think of using AI, this is per Larry, you have to do two things. I agree with this. You need to organize your existing data and make it accessible, because if it's not accessible and it's not organized, you can't use it. And then you need to start figuring out what AI tools you're going to deploy. So I'm going to turn this over to our panelists. And I'm actually going to start with Margeaux, and then I'm going to rotate through Gary and then BK. And Margeaux, the thing in this quote, first of all, I want you to kind of bring us all in on the life of, an agent, a broker, and the word accessibility of your data, and why data is so foundational. And, if you are managing, operating a P&L owner on the distribution side, what does that accessibility, or what does your data probably look like today? Over to you to take it away.
Yeah. Lindsay and I, are my co-founder, always joke about having to tell people that their baby is ugly, which is kind of what happens when you have to go in. And I was guilty of this myself at my agencies. I was like, no, we have great data quality, strenuous like practices, and we have data scientists. And then you get in there and you're like, oh my God, my baby's ugly. It's no matter how hard you try, there were underlying systems, legacy systems, core platforms, something you've homegrown. They're not quite up to snuff. So when you think about how distribution sits in the value chain, we are essentially middlemen to middlemen to middlemen, right? We're selling products on the behalf of another company that's selling products on behalf of somebody else, usually, especially if you're going through that broker wholesale channel. And so we don't actually own the policy. We don't own the premium. And we talk about this a lot in accounting, but our job really is data. Our job is an intangible relationship that we facilitate between an end insured and a client, and someone, that is actually selling the product. And so when you think about what we do on a daily basis, that data is really all we have. It is the core of what we sell. And for a channel to have such a need for data, but to be so removed from the data, and to have data be an afterthought, most brokerages, MGAs, even wholesalers, and even into associations, they have the current state of the market is they've got a lot of systems. I think sometimes we've clocked 48, 72, 56. Even the really small ones are in the multiple 12, 13, 14. They've got all of these different disparate systems, all of them providing some sort of point solution. And they can cobble it together, man. We're a resilient bunch. Like, it's going to work, right? But when you get under that layer and you want to start deploying AI and you say, okay, well, where does the data live? Well, the data lives in each individual 46 databases that are attached to each one of those point solutions. So in order to get past that, we have to start building these big, data lakes and warehouses and aggregates. And those, I like to think of that sometimes as building on a house on a foundation of sand, right? Because eventually that is going to implode. And so you cannot, before we even have the discussion of AI, the first thing is, do you have access to your data? And most of these companies in 2024 will give some kind of access to data. Maybe they have an API, maybe they have an SDK, maybe they have an export of a CSV, but at some, you might be able to get the data. But I always look at it as there's really two things you need to train AI. You need continuous access to data, not point in time access, not I can get it once a year or once a month, right? Because that data is constantly changing as we interact with our systems. And then the second is the amount of data. So on the broker side, there are a lot of workflows that are driven by our legacy platforms where we're not really encouraged to collect all the data, or we're collecting the data maybe in a CSV because the databases we're using actually don't have housing for that data. A lot of that around customer data. There's tons of data on the customer that you can get through third parties, that you can enrich. But if your core database doesn't allow for that data to live anywhere, then where is it? So you're not having continuous access to do continuous ongoing training. And the amount of data that you have is severely limited in that respect. So how do we start training AI? And so this is where, when I started to build IRYS, I did what everybody else does. I jumped to the fun stuff, right? I want to build the AI. I want to build the workflows and the screens. But at the core, we had to fix this prevalent problem in distribution, which is continuous access to data and the amount of data that we're actually collecting and storing.
Yeah, I love that. And Gary, I saw you nodding a lot during that, right?
I couldn't agree more
nothing
with
you've
Margeaux.
ever experienced before,
Yeah.
right, Gary?
So it's so funny. There was a cartoon that when ChatGPT first picked off, there was a cartoon that I loved, and I loved it for probably a different reason than everyone else. But it was a two-part cartoon. On the left side, it showed, hey, look, I just took my 4 bullet points and sent it to ChatGPT, and it generated this 3-page email. And the other side, it was, hey, I got this 3-page email, and I put it to ChatGPT, and it gave me the 4 bullet points. The reality is that's insurance. That's like you could replace that email with, I took my 30 data points on a quote and it generated my policy, and then it went to the customer, and the customer needs to read through and look for the actual keywords. And there are companies and brokers that employ employees just to scan PDFs and find those keywords, while it's data on the carrier side. Like, and by the way, when it went to the carrier, it was data on the distributor side at some point.
Yes.
So that picture and that cartoon of like that translation, like those 4 bullet points to me are data. Like that's, you could just replace that with data and say that's the entire insurance industry in every vertical. We see it. And without data, I agree with, there is no AI. There is no, there's no magic that's going to happen. And we still see customers, like even in healthcare and insurance, like paper is predominant, and information is entered over and over and could be fat fingered in as easy as it could be 20 years ago with no difference. And yeah, and you got to get through that. I mean, it's the only way to basically to change is to fix it.
One thing, and sorry, Gary, there's one, I'm like leaning in. One thing I'm so curious about, because of just, it's interesting. I was at the reinsurance side, which is like the inverse, but same problem that distribution has. I was just sitting at it's the carriers in the middle, sending it right, left, and center. But anyway, we love you, carriers. But okay, with that in mind, I started deploying master data management, and I want to just talk about that briefly, Gary, and your thoughts on that, because mastering data. Okay, there's the accessibility to your data, and then there's data is important, and then there is the how much redundancy do you have in your data. So for people who don't or are not familiar with owning their data or doing enterprise level data techniques, data governance, data stewardship, data processing, data deduping, all these things, like we deploy a lot of master data techniques, both at the enterprise level and up. There's a lot of front end systems that don't deploy master data management because they weren't built for that. That was never their role, like CRM systems as a prime example. How do you think, Gary, about the distribution world where, and have you seen use cases where it's like the Wild West of data. It's like data everywhere, but like Lisa Wardlaw could be mentioned, 10,000 times across the system. And how do you think people need to not only get control of their data, but what about the techniques of master data management? And then BK, I want to come to you on this for, how you deploy LLMs and things like that on top of this.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. So it's funny because I almost feel like we need like a intervention for the insurance industry. Like, and Lisa, you could do this. But like when I was on the carrier side, like Fortune 50 enterprise company, like we said we have no control. The distributors call the shots. They tell us what to do. But you go to the distributor side and they say the carriers are calling the shots. So someone's calling the shots, but they don't know who. And like someone's got to basically step in and say, look, we need to basically digitize the process, and it's got to be all sides have to participate. We know every standards group has failed. We know every exchange has failed. We've seen it, like everyone's lived through every attempt at this, but the technology wasn't the same as it is today, and the vision isn't the same. And so it's really interesting. Like at the MDM side and the enterprise side, I remember when I joined MetLife in 2012. There was a project called the Electronic Death Match, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is so cool! What is this project?" And it was an MDM project, enterprise MDM, right? And it was because we had both the life insurance side and the annuity side. We were fined, as many other life and annuity companies were fined by the government for saying, "Hey, when the Social Security death match file comes in, there's actually a file that says here's the people that passed away in the U.S. and here's the socials, like." You have really clean data to stop paying, but you don't pay the claims on this side. And it was a big fine, and it was a big industry thing. And the reality was Social Security numbers were inaccurate and explainably inaccurate, meaning I remember asking, how is that even possible? And you find out, well, like 30 million customers were born before socials were assigned. So you just give a dummy social. And like, because it wasn't until what, 1972 that social security became
Yep.
like a mandate. And so like you start and but you manage that. And then my solution at the time was, it's still today, I get asked about this project called The Wall. And it was a NoSQL document DB project using Mongo. And I was like, my goal was, I can't fix the 412 admin systems I own, which is the largest of any company owns. But I could get all the data together with an 80% is okay rate in order to simply answer a question, which is when a customer calls a call center, who are you? What products do you have? What's going on in your life? Like, are there claims? Is there, just to be able to give you better service? And that worked. That was the piece. And I think when you think through the lens of, if you say 100% is mandate, we will all fail. Like, you have to go in with the mindset of, look, 80% is great. Let's get through it. Tell the lawyers we're fine and move forward. And because otherwise, none of us move forward. And so it has to be done.
Gary, I have an anecdote for you when you talked about the social security numbers. I was working with a carrier, and we were working on a data set, and we realized that the carrier didn't have any of the email addresses for the insured. And so they were trying to deploy this marketing process, and they realized that all of the email addresses were dummy email addresses. And all of the agents and brokers on this call right now are probably laughing, because if there's one thing that I did the most when I was writing insurance, was I'm never giving my carrier my client's email address. That's like my relationship, right? As a broker,
Right.
it's that you hold as like, this is your secret thing. And so it was so funny they were like, we got all these things and we're going to do this direct to consumer campaign. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. And then they get in the data set and it's like all like jim.smith@gmail. It was just like every email was basically dummy email at that point. And so, yeah, that's, to me, it's a lesson on your data cleanliness and your awareness of not just like what it is, but how it's getting to you. Like, how is this data coming to you? And who's entering it and what are their motivations behind entering it? Like a human part of that.
Margeaux, what you're bringing up is the question I always ask is, who is our customer? And there is no clean answer. There is MetLife's customer the broker, the employer, the employee, the
insured
policyholder, the insured? Like, you have no, and just like, I think you have to answer that question, because I remember we had like 17 CRM systems, like all the same vendor, by the way, all the big CRM, 17 instances inside of it.
We're not naming names, but they're all the same.
Names, but yes, they're all the same. And we consolidated, and it was a huge effort.
But I just want to pause on that, Gary, though. Just because I went down this rabbit hole at an unnamed reinsurer. Those systems do not have master data management. I'm just putting that out there for everybody using them. Google it, Chat GPT it. By design, they do not have MDM, which makes them, by definition, not able to harmonize. Even if you had one, Gary, and not all of them, they are not able to harmonize and pull up a consistent lens of the customer, because by definition, they do not have master data management. And it's an interesting web that you lead when you've got the distribution side thinking that, and then the carrier side deploying master data management, and then the reinsurers deploying it on top of that, but yet none of them actually exchange that mastering of that.
We've had Lisa, you were in leading marketing, so there is, I'm going to again not mention names of the CRM, but we've replaced 2 $6 million a year contracts so far this year from that CRM. And like, I just wish the industry did a mark to market on CRMs. Just like, is there any value we're getting in a CRM tool today? Like, is there any value?
Heard it here from Gary.
Yes, that's it. Mark to market.
Or if you're on the broker
side, Google.
Well, on the broker side, they're deploying that. They're deploying the CRM as an operating processing platform. Yeah, everywhere. It's happening everywhere, and it just wholly unequipped to handle that type of
100%.
Let's talk about that as, okay, so we've got this data foundation. And by the way, like my beating drum, Larry, confirmed by Larry Ellison, right here by Gary as well. You cannot do AI if you don't have data as your foundation. So BK, I want to weave this into, the shiny ball, the disco ball, the LLM. I want it all. I want the LLM to read all those documents so my people don't have to read them. BK, let's move on to document ingestion, using LLMs. I'd love to hear your thought about data foundation. And then I would love it if you could talk us through, what are considerations that I do like that shiny ball, by the way, but I have to have it deployed on top of a very, not a kind of a quicksand architecture. Like I'm deploying it mentally on top of a really robust foundation with, things like MDM. BK, how do you see LLMs in this distribution environment? And talk people through what an LLM is, just so we're not using vernacular without explaining.
Sure. First of all, on the data topic, right? I mean, there is absolutely no AI strategy without a data strategy. I think it's absolutely, we all are talking about it. It's almost like garbage in, garbage out if you don't get your data right? So that's critical. And from a distribution standpoint, I like the example that Margeaux quoted, right? You're not going to send your email addresses to the carriers, but being a broker or an agent, you need the data to be mastered. You need to be able to serve your portfolio of customers, give them the different kinds of products that are available. Whenever you are entering a lead into a system, you're able to find out what, is the address correct. You are trying to make sure you are applying or mastering in the data at the point it is entered, right? So one of the big drawbacks of MDM solution is that you apply that at the back end. Once the data has come in, you will try to master it and then store it. But I think the real beauty is when you can do it upfront, right? So that's one comment that I want to make.
And BK, I just want to weigh in on that, right? There's the real-time MDM. So like to Margot's point, if you're getting data, y'all know my word is dynamically and in real time. Y'all have to think, for everybody on this call, pay attention to when you get your data. And Gary knows I pound on this too. We don't do batch anymore. We listen and we do real time. And so when you're doing that, you can be mastering your data in real time, as well as, kind of like purging your garage, maybe every 6 months or whatever. You can also be doing the batch backend. But I just wanted to weigh in, BK, that MDM has become a real-time concept now, if you use it correctly, if you're deploying it correctly, which means you have to deploy it on top of a real-time system, not a batch system.
Yeah, and I would say, we do a lot of data modernization efforts. 8 out of 10 of these efforts now has an MDM component, not in the past years where MDM will always be an afterthought. Let's do the modernization, we'll bring MDM later, but everybody is thinking differently. So I think we're spot on with the topic that MDM is absolutely critical, data is critical. Now going to LLMs, large language models, I think what I would like to first call out, the difference between large language models and, an AI model that used to exist in the past. The level of training, sophistication, data gathering, labeling, training, that entire effort goes away when you are dealing with large language models, because they come with a specific set of training already done. They understand natural languages really well. They can infer, they can respond. In fact, I think the latest one out of OpenAI, I don't know how many of you used it. It takes a little bit of time, but it is coming with reasoning, right? So you are able to reason and give responses. So they already come with a lot of specificity in terms of responding to a question. So that opens up an entire era or entire suite of new use cases which we never thought about in the past. Can I do a certain task differently? Like the example Gary mentioned about, going through policy documents, review every entry. I mean, you have BPO offices from large brokers in a lot of different centers where people just do this. In fact, we are right now dealing with at least a couple of the brokers where there's humongous army of operations sitting in a different center who just does review. Open to PDFs, put tags, compare, enter data, discrepancies, send it back. That's their day job. Now, these are type of use cases that opens up with the help of LLMs. Now, the second point I want to make why LLMs are so relevant from an insurance context is you get a lot of variability when you are dealing with insurance documents. You are dealing with carriers, you are dealing with brokers who provides their own responses. They will have their own codes, own binders. An individual carrier can have multiple issuing papers. I mean, at least one large carrier in this country has around 43 issuing papers. They will write the same risk, but in 43 different ways the policy can come in, right? So that's the variability you are talking about. And that's where large language models play a big role in terms of being able to pick information, read text in a different way, respond back to it. Obviously, there is a lot of work that you have to do on top of it in terms of making sure that you're contextualizing it. You're making sure the right type of information is picked up at the right moment, because when you are going through an analysis, there are steps that you follow. So making sure that the language model understands the way you need to read insurance document is kind of put in. And then, a lot of new use cases opens up. We're talking about code compares, we're talking about policy compares, we're talking about when you are responding to a risk request from a customer, can you pick up a set of early questions and feed it back? How do you create agents? There are a variety of use cases that you probably could not have thought about in the past. Right. So that's the beauty of large language models.
Well, BK, if I can say anything about the agent broker space, is that no matter what standard you give us, we are going to find a way around it. And everybody else, you give me an accord and I'm putting it on the back end. I'm putting everything in that big open text field. You give me a sticky note, everything's going in the sticky note, right? Like, we're just notorious for finding these workarounds. And when we started employing LLMs and IRYS to do some of this document reading, the excitement, at least in my agencies and some of the ones we've tested with, was all about being able to understand that fuzzy logic, right? So like, we do have a structure, like to your point, there's a structure in there, but there's 40 different ways that structure could be used. But then there's another 100 variables on the side, with each individual CSR or agent or MGA will utilize these fields in a slightly different way to mean slightly different things. And that's from a result of not ever updating the data model and having the correct usage at the core system. So we've created these, like, some of these are wild. And Lisa, you've seen it as we've run these LLMs on data migration. It's just like, well, for commercial, it's a first name, last name, but we're going to go ahead and put the business in the first name field. And it's just like they've created these crazy workarounds, which for me, the AI, it's exciting that we can take some of that data that previously took a human that knew insurance, that understood the difference between like combined single limit or split limit policy. And now AI can do some of that reasoning, even if it's offshoot, even if it's that sort of one-off offshoot, which is so crazy. And it's going to be, I think, revolutionary for data migrations, personally.
Yeah, and I was going to ask Gary, just real fast, Gary, on this, because I want to get into workflows in just a minute, but how powerful is the ability to not digitize forms and information, but to actually get to the point where we comprehend that. And then we're turning that into structured data. We're just such a linguistic industry. How important, and context matters, right? Like, I remember the old days, I had a 50-person data science team. We're like, hey, we can do keyword search. Keyword search was, no disrespect, it was horrible, because we couldn't understand the context in which the keywords were coming up. So like, something saying flood zone, we couldn't understand if it was in the flood zone or not in the flood zone, because it wasn't picking up the context cues for the way we write. Gary, how do you think about LLMs and distribution, especially with that ability to now contextually understand, not to digitize? Because if I'm on the phone, I'm thinking, yeah, whatever, we've been through this digital thing before, and you still have to eyeball this because none of the structuring was really able to READ.
Yeah. By the way, first off, like, to Margot's point, I wish I had $1 for every time someone used the word modified accord XML. So like, I've heard that, like, oh yeah, we use accord. It's a modified version. You're like, and well, what does that mean? And you get in and you see it doesn't look anything like it. It's just completely fudged. But Lisa, like to BK's point, like, LLM to me is simply the concept that a machine could understand what we understand in reading language and understanding the intent. So to me, it's a very basic function, which is LLM means you read a language and you could explain the intent, and you could output another language from that intent. That's it. It's as simple as that. Don't use it for anything more than what I just described, and you're fine. You could read code and output language. You could describe it, and that's very easy. That makes a lot of sense. On the distribution side, what it means is you could read policy documents. So we built a really cool POC recently which said, imagine you're buying a home and you want to get home insurance in the same step. Like it's one product and it's a same, imagine, wow, what a concept. You mean like, because reality is it's the same information. It's just carried over. So, you upload your driver's license, your passport, it digested, and we could use Quantify's Docify to do that. That's great. We've got that in there. We'll pull that in there. The next page will basically ask you information about the house. And instead of making a call to Zillow where we pay them, we made a call to OpenAI and it got back the price and the information on the home. Fascinating. Like, hey, that's public information. We could use OpenAI for that public, and it's all content, it's all understanding, and it's good at that. But the real cool thing was when you present the mortgage document to the customer and ask them to sign, they can now question it. They could say, what's my payment terms? What's my cancellation if I pay early? And it's very good at answering it without ever getting to a person. So the last piece, which we love, is we added in a step for inspection, which is needed for both mortgage and insurance. And I always upload a dummy inspection report that has a photo of a raccoon eating Cracker Jacks. And literally
that's your little hallmark.
It's my little hallmark. I love the picture. And you could in Uncork say, okay, in the inspection report, was an animal found? And it says yes. And what was it? It's a raccoon. And what was it eating? Cracker Jacks. And and you could use that in your algorithm now, both in the underwriting for mortgage and insurance. To me, it's like using it in that term is perfect. It's very good. It'll be even better. It's not magical. It's our basic understanding. It's what a 2-year-old's learning. And my 2-year-old right now is in Tuesberg. I'm learning this exact concept. And you could see how their brain is, and it will get better and better over time. The past tools, and you will know this, Lisa, from the marketing side, is the only AI tool we ever had at our disposal for in insurance was next best action. Mm-hmm. And it is the absolute best predictor of bias. I mean, there's no, it's never the next best action. It's just based on everyone that came before you, here's your next best action, which doesn't mean anything. And it's creating its own future is what we've always found. We always found next best action just writes what it thinks should be and implements it for everyone forward. I think this is opening up a new dimension.
Yeah. The one thing that I would like to I'm a big advocate of all of this. And I'm also a big, pay attention because there's a lot of smoke and mirrors out there. What we are talking about is not a digitization OCR with a back-end shop offshore somewhere that takes 48 to 72 hours to return an answer. What we are talking about is real trained AI as a service, LLM models that are sitting on top of insurance data that are in real time, converting that to context, converting that to comparison, and doing, thinking work that's going to enable your workforce. That's my public service announcement. Just be cautious because a lot of people just ask for turnaround times. That's what I would say politely, and understand what a quality assurance function looks like. It should be moderators, not people actually reviewing if you want a BPO model, that's fine. There's lots of different leverage resource models depending on the type, nature, and complexity of task, but that's Lisa's public service objective announcement for everyone. Just make sure you know before you go. Okay, but let's go there. Now that I feel like I've done my public service announcement, Margeaux, let's really talk about all of this is very, very, very powerful in and of itself. And it is wow. We can use AI to master data. We can get data real time, continual data quality as a service. We can apply LLMs and solve all these really complex operational, time intense things. But the magic of it comes in something you often talk about, Margeaux, and even on the AI productivity ROI curve, workflows is ranking one of the highest in any yield economic curve for ROI and benefit.
Oh, yeah.
And you also often talk about embedded insights or embedding the AI in your workflows. Can you give the audience a little bit of what you mean there and how that can be achieved? I think that's a really important concept.
Yeah. So I think to get there, we have to talk about state of the union, where are we at right now? And right now, workflow is really kind of non-existent in any kind of digitization. So you've got a workflow, and a lot of times I'm going to stick with the distribution side. you've got a checklist. It's literally a laminated checklist, and it says, okay, in order to do this function, you go to this program, and then you copy it and you go to this program. So for brokers watching, it's like, to do a quote, you're going to enter it in the CRM, and then you're going to take that data, you're going to put it through a rater, and then the rater is going to push it to the carrier portal, and then you're going to go into the carrier portal and finish it, and then you're going to put it back into the AMS if it doesn't download. So like that's a workflow, whether, however you describe it, that's a flow of things that need to happen. And State of the Union is it looks something like that. The problem with that, when you're talking about workflow and analytics, or you're trying to like push work in a direction, what happens now is that every, let's say, month, if you're a really great organization, you got a lot of help, you're running these analysis reports, your data team's pulling out reports, and they're saying, okay, last month, here's what we did. Here's the output of the workflow. It was good or it was bad. And then we go back and we think about how to change it and move the direction towards the corporate strategy. And then they go down back to their middle managers and say, hey guys, here's the changes we need to make based on last month's data. And that's if you have a well-oiled machine, right? Which never happens, because it never happens that way, right? Like, because the hardest thing when you're an enterprise or you're trying to scale is to get something like a corporate strategy filtered all the way down through to the person who's sitting at the desk doing the actual work. And so where I found value in workflow is, if that workflow felt like a choose your own adventure book, that's the best way, right? Like as I interact, I'm from the user perspective, I'm going into my system, I'm going to do my checklist. The software is capable of pushing me through that process, but instead of waiting for that analytic post, retro, when I'm actually making that decision in the chair, I'm getting that analytical, that talking point that says, hey, you should think about this, right? We should maybe instead of this carrier, you need to go to this carrier. And that can be filtered down through the top. So if you've got big associations are looking at this as a problem right now, aggregators, they're trying to stem the flow on their broker side to their carrier partners or their programs that they really want to focus on. And the problem is the person at the very bottom of the food chain whose job it is to do this actual work. How are we letting them know that that is the way that we want them to do that process? And again, it's all manual. It's an email. It's a training campaign, right? And it takes a really long time to steer that ship. That can be solved with AI embedded workflow. Meaning you can change a corporate strategy or you can change a partner in real time. And that information, as that new person 30 seconds later is going through that workflow, they now have new direction in analytics. That to me is, I don't think anybody has thought about what that means for speed for large corporations where, turning around the Titanic is very difficult. This is something that is highly revolutionary. And the problem prior is because that analytical, this is where Lisa, we worked a lot with IRYS on this, is processing data and transformative data. They're not living in the same databases now in any of these systems. So you have no other option but to do a post-mortem as opposed to a real-time analysis of that decisioning as it's happening. It's wild to me what that's going to look like in 5 years.
And I love that. I'm so excited about that. I mean, and what Margeaux is referring to, and I'll be a little techie, is HTAP architecture, which is hybrid transaction. So transactions for everyone. I saw some questions coming through, which we're going to get to in a minute, but in order to have a broker management system or an agency management system, you have to be able to process transactions. That's core. It's an operational system, but also the analytics. And in an HTAP architecture, which is what I just acronymed, those two coexist. They live together, which Gary and BK, I want to turn this over to you. When those two things live together and we're powering something like, clearly, Gary, Uncork is, at the core, it's codeless, enabling like real-time, always listening, on-demand workflows. And now embedding AI into that and changing those almost to react dynamically. Gary, how do you see this as a future for distribution? I mean, to me, this is one of the hallmark value adds.
Yeah, we DNA sequence software into data. So, we really describe Uncork as data-defined software. Like, that's it. So that's what it aligns perfectly to insurance companies, which is your whole business now is sitting in data, including your data and your software. So, like, the workflow itself, we completely agree with Margeaux. Like, that picture, what's needed. For us, when we think of workflow, I've tried every BPM tool you could name, they fail. Because they connect person to person, and eventually you'll find the person who didn't get what they need, which will download the data into Excel and email it to someone else, and suddenly there's no use of the technology. You've just broken the process. There is no more tracking. There's no more efficiency. You can't track. So to me, like when we think of workflow, it's not just human to human, it's human to machine, which means replacing integration tools. Like, so you don't need these integration libraries. When you think of an API, it should be no different than thinking of a UI. There's no difference in the way you orchestrate that. And then finally, like steps in a process. So like 3-step screen is a workflow. You click, if you have to click next and previous and save state, it's a workflow. And you need to define it like that. And the big thing, Lisa, that we love to talk about, it's exciting for us, and others will say, wait, what is a time machine? Which is like, if you implement what Margot's describing, the regulators will want to see what happened in the past.
Yeah.
And like humans have a very hard time explaining past transactions, but yet we're trusted to do so, which makes no sense. It always, like that whole concept made no sense to me, which is you go ask someone, why did you make that decision and underwrite that client? Like, what did you think? They can't answer. There's no documentation. It's all subjective. And machine, once you combine AI with something like Uncork that could freeze the transaction in a time machine, could now answer and say, here's exactly what was thought at that point. Here are the inputs, here's the outputs, here's why. And suddenly it's more powerful than a human. Like that's the piece which I think we have to embrace and get to. And workflow, to us, everything's a workflow. Everything we do is a workflow, a process, handling data. And like, I think, Margot, the thing you said is also the things that aren't stated have to be tracked. Like we'll track how long you're on a field or a section in a page as data, because like, if it's taking so long to answer that question, what is it about that question? And what could you do better to ask the question, or maybe not, and pre-fill? Like it's all data. The metadata around it's all data.
And BK, I think in particular with one of the examples you gave, right? I've seen a lot of one-off, again, I'll just call it point solutions, trying to do things like policy compare or whatever. But that's good. It's better than what people are doing today, but actually embedding that into the workflow. And I happen to know that the way you built that was, of course, with Uncork. I happen to know that. So how did you think about that? Like, right, it can't just sit on its own. It can't just be like, hey, we've compared 1-to-1 or 1-to-many. Here you go. Here's a data file. Here's a CSV file. You took it and said, no, it's got to be embedded into those workflows. And I know Margot has, implemented this at IRYS. How did you think about that? Why was the connection into the workflow so important for you?
I mean, at the end of the day, we are replacing a human activity with the help of AI. And if it's not in the workflow, it's an additional task. You will end up spending more time and effort if you're building it in silo. It has to be part of the flow, right? So, workflows and AI-powered workflows is the thing of the future. In fact, LLMs, the next, iteration of LLM and the next frontier will be agentic workflows, where the LLM is actually doing 2, 3, 4 additional tasks beyond the question that you have asked. Like, for example, one of the projects that we are doing for a large Canadian bank right now is to build so to speak, avatar for them who can do 4 or 5 tasks together, where the workflow is kind of designed in such a way. So along with bringing analytical needs to the workflow, as Margot called out, as you are getting the transactions in, you are also getting the insights that enable you to take care of those transactions in a more rapid way. You can also power a few additional, so in a very layman terms, a few additional calls to drive a few APIs getting driven right based on the inputs that have come. You can just
the way I think about it, BK, for people who aren't technologists, Margot love this, and I'm saying for the non-techie people, the way I'm getting points, Margot. But the way I think about it is, you don't have to tell the system exactly how your day and workflow is going to be. Sure. The system starts, and I use the word dynamically, hear me out, reacting to your actions. And as it reacts to your actions, those workflows adjust. So it's like you don't have to choose your movie, and you don't have to tell the system the 20 things and all the variables thereof. The AI starts to become smart and transcend beyond how you coded or configured a system to say, oh, you need some decision logic in there, wink, wink. But how I'm doing this is now I don't have to serve it up. And that was where, Gary, I love your point. Like, BPM systems always fell flat historically
Yeah.
because they weren't us. They weren't humans. You could never think through or code up or configure all of the scenarios, because when that thing came in, Margeaux, that embedded new insight, you now have to take different action. And so that's Gary. Now I want to get to the rock'em sock'em punch. The AI Fulfillment Center. I've heard you talk about this. You've talked about it with me once on a podcast. I think if I'm out there looking and thinking about all this, and I see some questions coming in, I want to leave time for those in just a minute. Man, there's a lot to assemble now. There's a lot. There's a lot of amazing things out there, but there's a lot to assemble. How do you see the AI Fulfillment Center of the future, Gary? And what do you think the role is going to be of that? And how can that help the audience listening in on this webinar today?
To me, it's getting data from unstructured data and to eventually replace the unstructured data with data itself. Meaning, like, everyone's going to be receiving some sort of document today. And as we talked about, like intelligent document processing solutions such as Quantifies, and we work with many partners out there, like they're all great. They all actually, and like what Quantify built with us is incredible in the insurance side. Like that's, and like the idea of data is going to come in a PDF or multiple PDFs. It's going to be unstructured. You're going to get emails. The AI is really good at replacing the humans there to be able to extract the data from it. But like then using that as data and keeping it as data, meaning, so it comes in, it has to come into a central submission hub. We always called it a digital front door. Every side of the business, from carrier to manufacturer and the distributor, should have a digital front door to say, here's how business is coming in. It's, normalized, not standards, normalized, cleaned up, enriched with third-party APIs, and then stored as data, and keep it as data, and then interface that data to your legacy systems, let it integrate and feed downstream. And suddenly you could provide a single underwriter workbench to every product line, every country, every business line. And that underwriter workbench could not just feed the policy systems, but could feed back the distribution systems.
Yes.
And
an
you've got an
integrated
ecosystem.
Risk exchange. What
a concept. And then, it's really interesting. And then the documents themselves aren't like today, the regulators, the 15,000 state regulators that are employed to do nothing but make insurance companies' lives, we think, slower. But the reality is they're there because they don't trust the filing meets the system, meets the PDF that the customer signed. So they hold insurance companies to the PDF that's signed, that final policy signed. But imagine a world where they could hold you to the data that's in the system. And the data will carry through as you migrate, to Margeaux said, migrate to new systems. Like suddenly the whole world changes. Like Lisa, I still could picture a world where I could take a filing document on any product and reverse it back into the form the customer sees, the underwriting system that the underwriter sees, and the policy system. And that should be all we do, is write a filing document.
Right.
There's no more.
Well, which is
that's a good. Yeah.
Which is where we're going. Okay, so I love this. I want to do a rapid fire and some questions coming in. Thank you, audience, for being so engaged. I want to leave us a little bit of time to get through these. They are all in and of itself long questions. So what I'm going to do is pick one of you to answer each of them. And if you could try to keep it rapid fire duration, just so we can get there. I'm going to try to get through 4 and 8 minutes. So deep breath. Let's go. All right, Margeaux, I'm going to serve up a very small one for you first.
Well, thank you.
We're dependent on IVANs for policy, document claim, direct bill downloads into certain systems like Vertafore AMS and Applied Epic. With rapid advancements in InsurTech and AI, is there potential for technology to altogether bypass IVANs? And then as a follow-up to that, can we operate without those core systems at core, or do we still need those dominant platforms? And I may also say, or what other operational platforms of the future would you see?
Oh my God, y'all are trying to get
answer.
Followed
I know, rapid
and
answer.
tagged and gonna have to hire some security after this question. Certainly, okay, so taking everything out of it and being very agnostic. Do we need another middleware to take an XML file, to translate it to an AL3 file, to push it to a legacy platform? No, we don't need that. We're far advanced. That technology died like 20 years ago. So without naming names, no, we don't need that. I think we're finally at the cusp where the technology is now becoming widely available. So even though we might have had it for 10 years, 15 years, I don't know that it was making its way downstream into the hands of people that could actually use it. It wasn't necessarily applicable. IRYS, Quantify, Uncork. There's a lot of people now in the market that are making that kind of technology widely available. So I think we'll let the market decide whether or not we need those systems. But I will tell you that technically, no, we do not need them.
The only thing I want to add, public service announcement, you do need an operational processing system. And
Thank you, Lisa.
As we've shared on this call, don't conflate or confuse that with a CRM. That's my public service announcement, very objectively. The next rapid fire BK is coming your way. What you've been discussing with the use of LLMs for ADI and BPMS is exactly what the industry needs. Do you have any examples where you've been able to demonstrate these solutions in production? I'm going to add the in production, like meaning deployed, not just academia.
I mean, see, the whole problem with documents, paper coming in, we've solved it at multiple places. We've worked with Gary and Uncork in multiple places where we have solved submission problems. We've solved policy compare problem, code problem. Some of these, in fact, some of these are running in production right now with very high degree of accuracy and business benefits, right? I mean, some of our implementations, if you look at the use cases that we have solved, policy compare, we have a live example where we have seen reduction of effort or efficiency gains north of 40% straight off the bat, right? Where we have, real data to kind of substantiate it. So the short answer is yes, those are running in production with real benefits.
Awesome.
And we can talk more offline if there are more details needed.
Yeah, you can look everybody up from this webinar, and we'll be sending out links and all of that. So if you signed up, you'll get all of our updates on that, but definitely available now. Gary, I'm going to ask everyone to do a call to action and what you're most excited about, but thoughts on, I think there's a thought here from any view on leveraging Accord for these use cases and helping drive towards standardization. And Gary, I'm really picking on that because, it's always like, we've always used this, I called it the excusisms of, well, they didn't give it to me in the format. Nobody will adopt the industry standard HTML. And like, I don't know. On the reinsurer side, we debated this for decades. I'm like, you know what, guys? We got to solve this chess game in a different way. You get to checkmate by not needing the standardization and still finding a way to do it. So that's like Lisa's opinion, Gary. And I'm not saying, by the way, I've never talked to Accord about this. I'm not saying they're unwilling to partner and make this much more dynamic. But Gary, what is your thought there?
Yeah, I was on the board of Accord before I created Uncork.
I didn't even know that.
They kicked me off. So I was in the board meeting. So I can't talk about what I talked there. But my opinion, from an Uncork perspective is XML is the wrong structure for data, like period. Like it was good 25 years ago. I said my first XML app I built in 2001. Like it was, so it's just an interesting structure to work with, but it doesn't mean you actually accomplish what we set out to, which is you could capture data without a schema, and it's probably more valuable than anything we're doing today because it's still data. You could still actually make sense of it and meaning of it. Even if it was just in a PDF table inside of a document, that's still something you could work with today. But sometimes understanding I remember there was a relationship hierarchy inside of the XML, inside of Accord, a party hierarchy. No one understood it. No one understood how to make sense of it, how to get it to work. So it's interesting. It's and it's not needed in this day and age, right? For everyone to implement the same. So that was my pitch. I'm sure it's maybe pissing off some people, which I don't care with the Accord side, but
we like to keep it spicy here. Margaret doesn't operate anything that's not at least challenging,
somewhat controversial at all
challenging to the status quo. But I think it goes back to the first question that Margot answered, which is the dependency on these middleware solutions. And not to say, by the way, if your data schema and your data model is not dynamic and adaptable, you probably do need some of those solutions, right? What we're talking about is a world where it's bi-directional and open. And to Gary's point, even things like LLMs, and BK and I've talked about this a lot, right, BK? Not just reading the unstructured document, but reading the structuring and making sense of the schema. So Gary, it's like reading code or reading any data and understanding the data dictionary by the repetitive patterns in use. So to Margot's point that she mentioned earlier in the webinar, whereas like somebody was using company name in a personal name because of the type of binding and insurance, an LLM can understand that and say, oh, they are using this field for that purpose. And BK and I have had a lot of discussions about that, and how some of the solutions for the LLM can be thrown at structured as well. So Gary, I just wanted to weave that all together. I will be quiet now.
I love it.
You all know if you've ever met me before, you cannot get off of a webinar, a podcast, or the stage without answering your call to action. So in under like a minute each, what would be your call to action? You get to say what you want people to start doing, stop doing, and continue doing. BK, I'm going to serve it up to you first.
So I'll repeat what I've been, talking about LLMs for a while now. First and foremost, getting clarity of the technology is important. It's so easy to use that you can download, OpenAI, ChatGPT, start experimenting with it. But the underlying construct, how it can apply to your use case is important. So understanding the tech, then, now once you understand the tech, you will have a really good understanding of what use cases you want to tackle. The last but most important thing, don't wait and watch, right? You need to get going with a few experimentation, a few POCs, etc., to prove out those use cases. I think there was an interesting question about, are you seeing business benefits in production? Yes. And the folks who are seeing it got started with this very early, right? I mean, it's not that they reached this stage right off the bat. It needed a time of experimentation. You had scenarios where you had to rewire certain implementations, etc., but finally got there. So it's important to get started. So for my remit will be that understand the technology well, map it to your use cases, and get started with some initial experimentation early so that you can reap the benefits down the line. So that will be my remit here. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, Gary, over to you.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I would say that there was a great business book back in the day, back probably early 2000s, called like "What Got You Here Won't Get You There," right? And everyone read that book, and that was I remember the orange cover. Apply it to all of your technology investments you've done today. So assume every single thing you've done up to now is wrong and has no value. Just discount it to zero. So
everything's done.
and just think about, to BK's point, where do you need to be? And don't, watch out for the evangelists inside of your company who go to these conferences and love being advisors and speaking, and just realize, is there a real mark to market on those value of those tech? And ask the questions and ask those hard questions. And just, to me, it's all about assume everything you've done today is discounted to zero. What would you do now? Mm-hmm. And that's, by the way, what a startup does. So startups will constantly look every day with the idea, we could pivot any direction we want. We're so dynamic and flexible. The same attitude has to happen in the corporate side.
All right, Margeaux, you get to bring us home.
I get to bring it home. Awesome. Okay, so I wrote it down. So start. I have been in dozens and dozens of brokerages of all sizes, but even on the enterprise level. Guys, you have got to start tying your tech strategy to a larger corporate strategy. Tech, to buy tech because it's cool. Your friend owns the CIO of some tech. Like, that's great, and I love that for you. But if your goal is to exit in 5 years, or your goal is to lower your margin, or your goal is, right, like whatever that is, if you're buying tech, if you're out spending 1,000%, increase on marketing, and that's not aligning with your tech, like nothing is going to come to fruition. You need to understand what the ultimate goal of your company is, and your technology needs to reflect that. I can't stress that enough. Please stop buying point solutions without looking at the larger tech strategy. So POC, it's fantastic, but when you go and implement software to 100 people, 200 and 300 people, and you don't have a larger strategy, like these people understand that, and the sentiment is you're going to lose employees and you're going to have horrible adoption. I cannot tell you how bad point solution adoption is right now in these companies. Stop buying the shiny balls and then making your people jump through 72 screens to get it done. It's not going to work out. So, and my call to action would be, everything you need to do right now is future proof. What used to take a year now takes a week. What used to take a week now takes a day. Like, the tech is moving so incredibly fast. You need to be thinking about what it's going to be in 10 years. If you're going to go through a 5-year implementation, it should be, what are we doing in 20 years? So please keep those things in mind as you're procuring tech.
Well, first of all, time just escapes me. We have tried to answer every single question coming through the chat. Thank you to all of our participants and the audience, and most notably to these amazing all-star panelists. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Margot. Thank you, BK.
Thank you.
My call to action
Thank
for
you, guys.
all of you is to do something today. This is not hype. This is not hyperbole. This is not in 3 to 5 years, we will get there. And this is certainly not, this is beyond me and my insert sentence. This is available. It is to be discussed and deployed with people that you can trust, that you know are leading the edge. And the only additional thing I'll say is, to Margot's point about buying tech for the sake of tech, please think of tech as enterprise grade. You need foundational, reusable things. Everything that everyone on this panel has discussed today is usable in the situations in which they discussed it, but also in at least probably 5 to 10 other places throughout their enterprise, which is really the ROI of AI in distribution. So thank you all for joining us. We will send out the recording to everyone who registered, and we look forward to hearing more from you as we evolve our series on AI in distribution. Thank you.
Thank you.